So consumer equilibrium is a model that explains how consumers will allocate their income between different products, right? So at any point in time, as we know, being consumers ourselves, we have multiple products to spend our income on, right? But we don't have enough income. We never have enough income to be able to buy every good and every product that we need, right? So what we do, we have to prioritize, right? So we have to prioritize. We have to choose few things and we have to give up on other things, right? Now, consumer equilibrium model that we explain with the help of a graph shows us how we will allocate our income between different products, right? So we are doing a very quick recap of what we did in the last class, and then we'll move forward from there. So what's consumer equilibrium? Consumer equilibrium is a model that explains how consumers will allocate their income between different products. At any point in time, I was telling you that every consumers in the world, no matter how wealthy they are, they will always have limited incomes, which means that there is limit to how much you can afford, right? There's a limit to how much you can afford, and therefore you need to prioritize, right? To choose from unlimited products to choose between, right? Now, when you have to choose between different products, you obviously are doing this on some basis, on basis of something, that which products you should choose and which products you should not choose or you should not buy, right? And what is this mechanism? What factors help you decide which products to buy and which products not to buy? That is all explained to consumer equilibrium model, right? Now, in this model, I said, first of all, what we'll do, we'll assume two products, right? So let's assume any two products that you like to spend your income on, let's say burgers and Coke, right? So on the y-axis, you have quantities of burgers that a consumer will buy, and on the x-axis, you have quantity of Coke that you will buy. The first thing that you have to draw on this graph is your budget line, right? Now, what is budget line? I did tell you, budget line is a graph, is a line that shows consumers affordability, right? That shows how much can a consumer afford with available income, right? So let's assume a consumer currently has an income of $200, and each unit of burger costs, let's say $10, and each, right? And each, so this is price of burgers, PB, and let's say each bottle of Coke currently costs $5, right? Are we getting this? Okay. So if a consumer decides to spend all of his income on Coke, right? If a consumer decides to spend all of his income on Coke, then what's the maximum amount units of Coke that this consumer can buy with affordable, with available income, right? So all you have to do is to divide this 200, which is your total income, with 5, which gives you 40, right? So the total quantity of Coke that you can buy with available income is 40. Similarly, the total quantity of burgers that you can buy with available income is 200 divided by 10 is 20. So 20 units of burgers, right? So that is what gives you your budget line. I did tell you that any point within budget line, very nice, Hassan, any point within budget line is affordable. Any point on the line is also affordable, but any point outside the curve, outside the line, is not affordable because you don't have enough income, right? Okay. Now, another difference that you need to know between a point within the curve and any point on the curve, right? On point A, you're not fully utilizing your income. You're not fully utilizing your income, right? How do we know? Because you could have bought more quantities of goods, but you are currently saving some of your income, right? So any point within the line, within the curve, shows some unsaved income. So your utility, consumer's utility, will never be maximized at any point within the line, within the curve, right? Whereas on the other hand, any point on the line, that could be any point, right? Even this point, right? So let's say this point A, right? Or this point B, right? So any point that's on the line means that consumer is fully utilizing his or her income, and therefore his or her utility will be maximized on a point, will be maximized on any point on the line, on the budget line, not within the budget line. Easy. And obviously we know any point outside the curve is not affordable because you don't have enough income for that. Got it, students? Okay, now think about this. After you have made the budget line, the next thing that you need to have on your consumer equilibrium graph is your indifference curves. Now, what are your indifference curve? Indifference curve, I'll explain you the definition again, right? Because some students were confused as to what an indifference curve shows. So I'll tell you again, right? So there can be unlimited number of indifference curves, right? So there can be unlimited number of indifference curves, but the only thing that you have to make sure that indifference curves are always parallel to each other, right? So they cannot intersect each other, right? They are parallel to each other and they are all bending towards the origin. Indifference curves are parallel to each other and they bend towards the origin, right? So they can't be like this. Indifference curve can't be like this, right? It can't be like this. Instead, it has to be like this, bending towards the origin. Okay, now think about this. If I name all these indifference curve, let's say I1, I2, I3, I4, right? Now, any indifference curve that is to the right of another indifference curve shows you higher utility. Why is that showing you higher utility, higher satisfaction? Because on a higher indifference curve, you can consume larger quantities of the two products. So if you look at I4, right? So if I choose 4 points, right? Now think about this, students. Listen to this carefully, right? So let's say I'm choosing these 4 points and these 4 different indifference curves, right? So let's label it A, let's label it B, let's label it C, let's label it D, right? Now, which point out of these 4 is giving you highest combination of the 4 products, of the 2 products? One is on the x-axis, the other one is on the y-axis. So if you compare point A with point D, so you have lowest quantities of goods available on A, because you can see it's closer towards the origin. So when it's closer towards the origin, this means that you can consume lesser quantities of both the goods. And if you compare this with D, you are able to consume largest possible quantities on point D, right? So out of A and D, which one will be preferred? Out of A and D, which one will be preferred? Obviously D. Yes or no? Preet, Amna, Hassan, is everyone clear on this, right? So an indifference curve that is further away from the origin or to the right of another indifference curve, that indifference curve is preferred over another indifference curve. Easy, we go on this. Is everyone clear on this? Okay. Now think about this, but you also have to see that which indifference curve are attainable, which indifference curves are attainable. Very good, Hassan, right? Now we know that looking at this graph, it's only indifference curve 1 and it's indifference curve 2 which are within the affordability, right? Which are within the affordability given the budget line of this consumer, right? So indifference curve 3 and 4 are automatically out, so we'll just remove these from here, right? So now we're left with 2 indifference curve, I1 and I2. Now, out of I1 and I2, which of the 2 is more preferred? We do know the one that is to the right. So indifference curve that's to the right, right? That's more preferred. So we will also skip indifference curve 1, so that leaves us with indifference curve 2 only, right? Because obviously, yes, as Preet said, indifference curve 2 will give you higher utility compared to indifference curve 1, right? Now, where the budget line is tangent, where the budget line is tangent to your indifference curve, you put a dot over there. This is known as consumer equilibrium point, and this equilibrium point will show you that how many units of burgers and how many units of Coke will this consumer consume, right? So let's say at this equilibrium point, consumer is consuming 25 units of Coke, right? And consumer is consuming 25 units of Coke and let's say 12 units of burgers, right? So that is what is giving him the highest level of utility. Okay. Now, another thing what's true at this equilibrium point, which I explained you in the last class, but we could not discuss it in much detail, that is known as equimarginal principle. Now, what is this equimarginal principle? So equimarginal principle is a mathematical formula to explain what is true, to explain what happens at this equilibrium point, right? Just give me a second. So you have, so this equimarginal principle now this equimarginal principle, right? So just a second, right? All points on one indifference curve give same level of utility. Yes, that's correct. That's the very definition, right? Now, are you clear on the definition? So students, think about it. What is an indifference curve? Indifference curve is a graph that shows all combination of two goods which give same level of utility for the consumer, right? So whether you're operating on point A or you're operating on point B or you're operating on, right? So think about this. Okay. Right. Okay. So think about this. So if I draw an indifference curve, right? Okay, now have a look at this. Now, indifference curve is a graph that shows all combination of two goods. That could be any two goods. Let's, for the sake of simplicity, label these as good X and good Y, which give same level of utility to the consumer, right? So let's identify some points here, right? So let's say you have point A, right? Bundle A, in fact, right? Bundle A. Why am I saying this is a bundle? Because it's showing you a combination of two products, product X and product Y, right? And let's say then you have bundle B and then you have bundle C, right? So even though you are consuming different quantities of the two products on each of these bundles, even though you are consuming different quantities of the two products on these bundles, but you are indifferent between these three bundles. Why? Because the total utility, the total satisfaction that you get is the same, right? So let's say on bundle A, you are consuming 10 units of good X, 10 units of good X, and 15 units of good Y. And on bundle B, you are consuming, let's say, 12 units of X, right? You are consuming 12 units of X, right? And you are consuming 7 units of Y. And on bundle C, you are consuming some other combination, right? So on bundle C, you are consuming, right, 17 units of X and let's say 5 units of Y, right? Now, even though the three bundles are showing you different quantities of the two products, but these are equally preferred, which means you are indifferent between these three bundles, right? Is this making sense, right? Is there any point where the curve touches the axis? No, no, no. No, it doesn't touch the X or the Y axis. The graph doesn't touch the X and the Y axis. Indifference curve doesn't touch it. Budget line does touch X and Y axis, but indifference curve doesn't, right? Easy? You good on this? Okay. Now coming back to what I was explaining you, that at this equilibrium point, students, this is the point which shows us equimarginal principle. And what is equimarginal principle, right? So equimarginal principle is a formula that shows what's true at this equilibrium point. Equimarginal principle, right? Now what it shows us, principle, right? It shows that at this point, the marginal utility of product B, whatever it is, let's say B stands for burgers, divided by price of B is equals to marginal utility of C divided by price of C. Easy, right? Now, you need to understand the significance of this formula. I mean, apparently this is just a formula, but it has a deep understanding to it, right? So let's have a look at this. So marginal utility of product B divided by price of B is equal to marginal utility of product C divided by price of C, right? Which in this case we mean burgers and Coke. Okay. Now what this formula is showing us is that consumers will prefer to spend their income on products that give them higher utility for each dollar spent on that product. Consumers will prefer to buy products which give them higher marginal utility for each dollar spent on that product, right? And I'll give you an example after this. In fact, I did give you an example in the last class, right? So what you need to do, consumers spend, or you can say consumers prefer products which provide them higher marginal utility for each dollar spent on them, which provide them higher marginal utility for each dollar spent on the good. Okay, students, are you following me or not? Now think about this. So let's do that example one more time so that you completely understand, right? Now let's say there's a person sitting in front of me and I ask him, which of the two products does he prefer more? Does he prefer tea more or coffee more, right? And he replies to me with this. He says that coffee provides him 100 utils of utility. What is util? Util is basically a measure of utility, right? So he says that coffee provides him 100 utils of utility and tea provides him 50 utils of utility. Okay, fine. Now, as per this thing, he should be only buying coffee and should never buy tea, right? Because obviously, which of the two is giving him more satisfaction? But here is the trick part. And the trick part is that it's not only how much satisfaction do you get out of it, it's also about how much price you are paying for it. And this is very fundamental to our model. Students, think about this. So when you go to something, let's say you really like to watch a cricket match, a live cricket match. But if let's say you get to find out that the tickets of cricket match are very, the prices have gone up and, the tickets are really expensive, then you might say to your friends, to your family, that it's not worth it. Now when we say it's not worth it, it doesn't mean that you're not getting satisfaction out of it. You are in fact getting a lot of satisfaction out of it, but you think that spending that much money on that thing is not worth it because it's very expensive. Can preference change with the price? For example, coffee is available for $1 also, and for $10 also. Can satisfaction change? Right? I mean, yeah, so you have to compare it with the price. Please have a look at this. So if let's say this is $10, if a cup of coffee is worth $10, and let's say the price of tea is $4, right? Now, when you do this simple calculation, marginal utility, so this was your marginal utility divided by price. So for coffee, you're getting 10 util of utility for each dollar that you spend on coffee. On the other hand, for um, tea, so 50 divided by 4 gives you how much? So that gives you 4 ones are 4, right? 4 ones are 4 and 10, so it gives you 12.5, right? So it's 12.5 utils of utility for tea, right? So since tea is cheaper, even though tea is not preferred as much as coffee by this consumer, but since that is cheaper, therefore it means that tea is giving him more utility for each dollar spent on it. Because what's the constraint here? The constraint is the spending power. The spending power will determine which of the two products will the consumer prefer. Got it, students? Okay, now this is what equimarginal principle is, and in theory, what it explains to us is something very simple, that consumers prefer products which provide them higher marginal utility for each dollar spent on them. Got it? Confusion, students? Right? We good on this? Okay. Now, the next thing that you need to know, that by the way, we can extend this equimarginal principle beyond two products. We can extend this equimarginal principle, right? So right now we just saw it for two products, but now we can extend this to more than two products. So then in that case, it would be marginal utility of product A. That could be anything. Product A could be anything, right? Food, laptop, phones, right? Divided by price of A is equals to marginal utility of product B, could be anything, divided by price of B, then marginal utility of product C divided by price of C, and then similarly marginal utility of product D divided by price of D, and this can be ongoing thing, right? Now, what we are saying in this case, when we generalize equimarginal principle like this, so what we're trying to say here is that consumers will choose out of all possible options, consumer will choose product that gives him highest level of utility for each dollar that's spent on that good. Right? So consumers obviously in real life are not choosing between two products, they're choosing between, hundreds of products, multiple products at least, right? So they will choose products which give them the highest level of utility for each dollar spent on those. Easy? Any confusion so far, students? Okay, now this will become more clearer right? When we do this question, right? Now think about this. The question says for 25 marks, and I did tell you that this is a very important topic from exam point of view, right? So that's why we're spending so much time and all, right? Now the question here says economic theory emphasizes, can you see my screen? Can you see my screen, students, right? So economic theory emphasizes the idea of an equilibrium position. Discuss whether the idea of an equilibrium is a useful and practical way of explaining the behavior of a consumer, right? Okay, great. Now think about this, students. What you will do, what you will write in this question, let me explain you step by step, right? So consumer theory emphasizes the idea of an equilibrium position, right? Discuss whether the idea of an equilibrium is a useful and practical way of explaining the behavior of a consumer, right? Now, what you need to do, first of all, you will explain this entire thing, that what this consumer equilibrium is, right? So you'll start off by defining, since this is for 25 marks, right? So you will explain in detail that what consumer equilibrium model is. You'll start off by defining that it's a model that explains consumer spending pattern, and then you'll say that we take some assumptions in this, right? So for this model, we are assuming that consumer has two products to spend their income on, and they have limited income, which is realistic assumption, because every time people have limited incomes in this world, and they have two products to choose between, the prices of those products are fixed, and so on and so forth, right? So after you've explained everything, then you will tell what is budget line, right? And what is budget line and what is indifference curve. After defining both of these two, then you will show on a graph, right? Then show on a graph, and you'll say that wherever the budget line is tangent to an indifference curve, where the budget line is tangent to an indifference curve, that's an equilibrium position, right? So, right, just like the way we showed in a bit, right? So you can choose any two products. I don't know, you can choose between phones and, let's say, chocolates or anything, right? And so on. Okay, now after you have shown, right, after you have made the budget line and the indifference curve on your graph, then you will show that there is one indifference curve which is tangent to your budget line, right? So let's say something like this, and this is your equilibrium point, right? Then you will explain what this equilibrium point signifies. You'll say that this thing, equimarginal principle, holds true at equilibrium point, which shows that consumer will spend their income on products that gives them highest level of marginal utility for each dollar spent on that good, right? Easy. Is this simple? So after you've explained this, all of this thing in detail, right, then you have to explain if this model is even useful and practical way to explain consumer behavior. Now that's where the main part comes. Now students, think about this. You have been a consumer throughout your life, right? So let's ignore the first 10 years of your life, because you were too young, you didn't know which product to buy, which product not to buy, right? But now you are mature and you get some pocket money which you can spend independently and all that thing, right? Now you tell me that how many times have you done such detailed calculation to decide what to buy and what not to buy, right? Are you getting me? So let me repeat this question. So you have been a consumer throughout your life, but how many times have you exactly done these calculations to decide what to buy, what not to buy, right? Are you getting me? So the idea is we don't do these calculations, right? I mean, we have our own understanding of which product is more useful and which product is not that useful, right? Hassan, I'll come to your question. So the idea is, it does not apply, right? Now, this is exactly what you need to talk about, right? So how limitations, or let's put it down like this, right? So what are limitations of this consumer equilibrium model, right? Limitations of right? So limitations of consumer equilibrium model, right? Now, the first thing that you have to tell, that consumers often do impulse buying. Have you ever heard the word impulse buying, right? So that's one major limitation of consumer equilibrium model, because oftentimes what happens when we are, when we are out there shopping, we like something, right? And we do not even think about how much it is for, because we have liked that product so much that we, buy it instantly, right? So now this thing is a major limitation of, consumer equilibrium model, because it doesn't account for the fact that some people will do impulse buying, and they will decide on the very instance whether they want to buy something or not, right? Obviously other consumers are more rational, and they do their calculation, and they decide in advance which products to buy and how much money to spend on these products. But other people are more impulse, they just, kind of buy if they like something and so on, right? So that's one limitation, right? And when there will be impulse buying, then you're not looking at the utility that you'll get from a product and how much you're paying for it. I mean, you just instantly buy something. Students, is this making sense? Right? Okay. What else? Right? Right? So basically what we are commenting on is whether this is useful and practical way of explaining consumer behavior, right? So that's the first thing, right? That impulse buying, it doesn't account for impulse buying. Then another thing that you can write over here, right, is that in real life, there is so many things, so many products that we can spend our income on that we hardly get to evaluate that which products, and it'll give you specific example to understand what I mean by this. So many options, making it difficult for the consumer, even if we know this model, right, making it difficult for consumer to compare and decide, right? Right. So think about this. Whenever you're deciding with your friends, uh, right, that where to eat from, right? So where to go for dinner, or which restaurant to choose and things like that, right? So what's the idea? That there are so many restaurants to choose between that you perhaps cannot explicitly do this analysis and decide that which of the restaurants will give you highest level of utility for each rupee or each dollar that you are spending your money on, right? Is making sense, right? So that is another major constraint of consumer equilibrium model, even though it does say that equimarginal principle can be extended to all possible products, right? Equimarginal principle, it does say that equimarginal principle can be extended to all these products, that marginal utility of A divided by price of A is equals to marginal utility of B divided by price of B, and so on and so forth, right? But it doesn't allow us to easily compare, right? Is making sense, students? Right? So same goes for any other product, right? So if you think of clothes, I mean, there's so many different brand options in clothes that you can't really, decide which one is giving you more satisfaction for each dollar that you're spending on it. Is making sense, students? Is everyone clear on this? So that is all what you need to explain in this. You will say that it does explain consumer behavior to some extent, because it's kind of intuitive, in the sense that it says that consumers are rational, which means that you will only prefer products that give you highest level of benefit for each dollar that you have. But oftentimes we see that this is not observed, or this rule is not followed by all consumers in the world, right? They are more into impulse buying. When they come across a product which they really like, they will buy it all of a sudden, right, without even thinking whether they need it or not need it, or how much is even the price for it, right? And similarly, another thing that makes it difficult to implement this behavior or this model in a real life is that there's so many products and so many options to compare that we can't really do calculations for all of those, right? Which intro, Hassan, which intro you mean, right? And in the start, so if you are asking me that what we have to write at the start of this question, right? So you just need to explain everything in detail as to what consumer equilibrium is, right? So consumer equilibrium, we'll say, is a model that explains how consumers will allocate their income between different goods, right? How consumer allocate his income between different goods, right? So that's what it shows. Then you will start off by defining what budget line and indifference curve are, right? Ideally, if you can draw the graph, that will help, even though the question doesn't say with the help of a graph, but I did tell you that, I mean, if you remember the graph, if you know how to explain it, it's always recommended to do that because you'll get extra credit for that. So after you've explained all of this, given the definition of budget line and difference curve, then you'll make a graph show that wherever budget line is tangent to your indifference curve, that shows you equilibrium point, and that equilibrium point is basically explained by equimarginal principle, which means that marginal utility of product A divided by price of A is equals to marginal utility of B divided by price of B. Then you also need to explain what equimarginal principle says. It basically says that consumers are rational and they will spend their income on goods that give them higher marginal utility for each dollar spent on those, right? So this being said, then you'll explain that how much useful this model is. Then you'll talk about its limitation, the first one being impulse buying, that consumers often decide to buy something without even realizing or without even asking themselves that how much they need that product. And secondly, in real life, there are so many different products and goods available that it really makes it difficult for consumers to compare between all those options and then to decide the best and most cost effective, because what we are looking at basically in in this model is cost effective, right? So there could be a couple of options as we just discussed, right? So always remember this example, right? So we did look at this example where this consumer was getting twice as much utility from coffee as much from tea, but since tea was much cheaper than coffee, that's why that consumer preferred tea over coffee. Easy, students? Is it making sense? Is everyone clear on this? Right. Okay, Mubin, you had another question. Is everyone clear? Amna, you were confused about the definition of indifference curve, but now are you clear? You know what that shows? Okay. For 25 marks question, approximately how much word should be there? I mean, it's not about the words, Hassan. Every year students ask me this question. It's not about the words, it's about the level marking, right? So you have to include all the 4 points in your answer, right? And what are those 4 points? So first of all, you have to write the knowledge. So level 1 is knowledge, which means that you should know what indifference curve is, you should know what in budget line is, right? So that's knowledge. So when you have given correct definitions of these concepts that are involved, then you'll get the marks for knowledge, right? So out of 25 marks, you'll get let's say 4 to 7 marks will be for level 1, right? Just for writing definitions and so on, right? Then level 2 of marking scheme is for application. So you need to apply this knowledge to the question being asked, right? So this question was saying how much, how consumer equilibrium explains consumer behavior, right? So then you have to write something like so application, right? So in this you talk about that what this equimarginal principle is showing and how is this model right? How is this model explaining how consumers allocate their income between different products and so on, right? So that's where the application marks come from, right? Then you have level 3, which is analysis. So you analyze, right? To analyze. So that was the part where we explained that how much useful and practical this is as a model in explaining consumer behavior. We did say that it's obviously making sense. It's intuitive that consumers will want to maximize their utility for each dollar, but it's not always like that, because sometimes people are doing impulse buying and they buy things all of a sudden and they don't really do all the calculations and all that, right? So that part was analysis, where we analyze what happens in real life and things like that, right? So you will get between 16 to 20, and when you give your final evaluation, right, level 4 is evaluation, like your final conclusion and recommendation about the statement being asked on the exam, on the question, then you get the evaluation marks. Then you get the evaluation marks, right? Easy. You good on this? That would be between 21 to 21 to 25, right? So that's how it is, right? Okay, now we'll quickly look at one more question, right? And we'll continue from here in tomorrow's class, right? Right. Okay, so let's do this question, right? So let's do the A part, and that will help you better understand what indifference curves are. Okay, now the question here says, people, 2A, this question, explain why indifference curves are usually drawn convex to the origin, right, are downward sloping and do not cross each other. So why are indifference curves convex to the origin, which means they're bending towards the origin? Why are they downward sloping and why they do not cross each other, right? So that's the question. The students, have a look at this. Now, what you have to say, first of all, you will start off your answer by defining what indifference curves are. So you will say indifference curve are a graph that shows combination of two goods which give same level of utility to consumer, like the way I explained you, right? So indifference curves are graphs that shows combination of two goods which give consumer the same level of utility, right? Yes or no? Okay, now think about this. So you have multiple points I showed you, right? You can choose, let's say, different combinations on this indifference curve. So your bundle A, your bundle B, your bundle C, and even though you're consuming different combinations of the goods on bundle A, bundle B, and bundle C, but you are indifferent between these 3 points, which means they are equally preferred because the total utility that you drive, whether you operate on A or whether you operate on B or you operate on C, the total utility is same. Easy? Is everyone clear on this? Okay. Now, this being said, students, then you will say that why are indifference curves downward sloping? Now, think about this. If indifference curve is, upward sloping, then it doesn't make sense. Why? Because an upward sloping indifference curve means, let me show you, let me draw it over here, in fact, right? So if an indifference curve is upward sloping like this, that means that you can choose, right? You can choose a bundle where you get more products, more quantities of the two goods. Then how can you be indifferent? Students, are you getting me or not, right? So the very idea of indifference curve is that you are indifferent between A, B, and C. This means that if you get more units of one good, you have to give up on the other good, right? So if you move from A to C, what happens, students? So you are indifferent between A and C. Why? Because the very idea is when you move from A to C, you get more quantities of X, let's say 50 units of X, right? Now, today right, so this is a nuisance, right? Right, diminishing rate of marginal utility, right? So that's the idea. Just a second, right? Right. So let's say you had X, right? So what's the idea here, right? So if you're, let's say, consuming 10 units of Y at A and 5 units of X at A, right? And then you move from A to C, right? Now you will be consuming more units of X, but that means at the expense of, that means that consuming more units of X, moving right on the X-axis means you have to move down on the Y-axis, right? So that's why you are indifferent between the two goods. But if an indifference curve is upward sloping, then there's no reason why a consumer will prefer this point lower on the indifference curve, because it means lesser quantities of both the products compared to the quantities that you get on a higher point, Students, are you following me? Right? Is it making sense? Okay, so that's why indifference curves are downward sloping. Then secondly, the question said, right, why don't they cross each other? So there's an also, in fact, let's stop over here. My writing tab is also not working properly, right? So we'll continue from it in the next class, right? Students, so I'll see you tomorrow, right? And we'll continue from here, right? So we'll start off with this question, right? Okay, so I'll see you tomorrow. Take care and good night. Thank you. Bye.